Hello, and welcome to this screening of Machuca, a film directed by Chilean filmmaker Andres Wood that explores the months leading up to Chile's bloody 1973 military coup, which ushered in 17 years of dictatorship. The film will be introduced by students in my political science course, The Politics of Latin America, who have studied the Chilean case and watched this celebrated film.
The year is 1973, and Salvador Allende is the Chilean head of state. He won the elections as the presidential candidate for Unidad Popular, or Popular Unity, a left-wing coalition backed by 9 different parties. As a presidential candidate, Allende promised the strengthening of the welfare state and redistribution of resources through higher minimum wages and other economic policies. However, Allende's socialist agenda faces adversity at the international level from the US concurrently to Allende's election. The United States was highly involved in the mitigation of communism and similar ideologies around the world, but especially in Latin America to avoid another Cuba in the region. Hence, the US foreign affairs at this time consisted of financial and intellectual support to those who opposed Allende's socialist government. At the national level, the society was extremely polarized by class status. The working class were fierce supporters of Salvador Allende and his socialist programs, while the upper class supported right-wing parties that were against Allende's policies. This polarization was visible on the streets, where both sides mobilized for their demands. Due to increasing involvement of the state in the market, private investments declined. Hence, an economic crisis followed. By August 1971, inflation rates reached 77% and kept rising to 323% as of July 1973. Allende's government ran out of national reserves within 2 years, and this transformed into saving measures like food rationing. Chileans could not purchase more goods than those specified by the government. Friction between classes escalated to violence and clashes between radicalized sectors that created armed militias. Chileans could not consider political parties as a way to attain their political demands because of historical dissatisfactions.
These paved the way for the intervention of the military, seen as the only group capable of bringing order and stability to a largely divided and violent society. This polarization has to be understood under the context of huge inequality that characterized the Chilean society at the time and still shapes Chile's society today. A white European elite concentrated on their hands enormous economic and political power, while the minority groups like mestizos and indigenous people were at the bottom of the social hierarchy. The victory of Allende and his promises of redistributive policies made the marginalized push toward a change in the Chilean economic and political conditions. However, this threat to the status quo also fostered the mobilization of the elite and ultimately a violent military coup.
Through the rise of the authoritarian regime of Pinochet, class division was an essential weapon against the masses. In Machuca, this form of manipulation is illustrated most obviously through the relationship between the children in school. Despite the efforts of the clergy, wealthy students as young as 10 years old were already predisposed to discriminating against their poorer peers. The Pinochet regime focused heavily on the eradication of socialist ideologies, and with it, the idea that all members of the Chilean population were created equal. Throughout the film, take great notice in the ways the military continue to enforce and encourage the self-segregation of the working and upper class, and the deadly consequences of this division.
Another important theme depicted in Machuca is survival. The film highlights multiple examples of the adverse economic conditions in Chile and their effects on individuals across socioeconomic class. Furthermore, Machuca most clearly demonstrates this through the desperate actions of the mother to obtain goods and services not accessible to her by sleeping with an upper-class older man. Although the Pinochet regime stabilized the economy in Chile, it led to drastic economic inequality. During the film, watch for the frequency of actions essential to survival for individuals of differing classes. When taking a look at the movie itself, it is of great importance to realize the contribution of symbols as the dark line of the movie. For instance, one of the most prominent examples is the wall as an implication to the worsening political situation. While the slogan displayed on the wall was, "We shall not have a civil war," it later became, "We shall have a civil war," as the slogan was partially covered, implying the deteriorating political situation. It eventually was painted white as Chile entered the Pinochet era.
Key parts of the movie that depict the scale of the military takeover involve religion. Typically, religious institutions are viewed as a sacred place, yet the military had no issue taking over the school at the start of the coup. Having turned the religious school into a military school, the priest was no longer allowed to have a role in running the institution that he had previously taken great pride in running. This violation of sacred spaces shows the minimal boundaries that the military had during the coup. The lack of boundaries is shown even more in the exiling of the priest who eats the sacrament in the school's church during an assembly as a form of protest, declaring the church as a place that is no longer holy.
Machuca shows us the rising tensions between groups leading up to the breakdown of Chilean democracy, the military coup of 1973, and the subsequent seizure of power by Pinochet. What we also see in Machuca is that such events don't come from nowhere. The coup was swift and decisive, but what was most troubling was that it worked. Chilean elites and foreign actors saw this seizure of power as legitimate and preferred it to the democratic election. The film explores an important question. Why do democracies fail? When it comes to understanding the stability of democracies and how they can break down, the key factor is faith in the system. The people must believe that their problem can be solved through the democratic process. Polarization, as presented in the film as across class lines, is toxic to this faith. When the people are polarized to the point of not believing the other side can be reasoned with, they don't have the incentive to follow the rules. It's also important to take into consideration that democracy can be attacked from outside as well. The movie doesn't touch on it, but the US had a long and deeply rooted history of involving themselves with Chilean politics and can be credited with much of the economic strife seen before the coup. Democracy, even in cases where it's old and established, requires a lot of upkeep. When faith in the system is eroded, the people begin to look toward alternatives to democracy. The institutions need to be strong, and the people need to believe in it, or else it is susceptible to attack from outside and within. Without the full support of the people and their participation, there is no logical way in which a democratic state can be accomplished. However, Machuca shows us how it is possible to protect democracy through communication and mutual understanding. Thank you very much, and enjoy Machuca.